guys, Matt, IronTrap Garage, and we are finally in winter building mode after all our adventures down south. We're back in the shop, pretty much staying put for the rest of the winter until weather gets a little bit nicer. We're not really going anywhere, so I could finally buckle down and get some work done on all these freaking cars that I've gotten over the past summer. So what we're going to work on today is just do a quick little kind of update and work on the 33 3-window project. So basically, since the last video, what I've done is been working on gathering some parts and trying to get my ducks in a row and get things set up for to send the engine away, or the block, or the main parts of the engine, to get them over to Ron, to get him working on that over the next, who knows, 6 months, 8 months, or a year, whatever it takes to get for him to get it done. So I've been trying to do a couple little things before the heads and the end. The heads and the majority of the parts are gone for quite a long time. I want to work on a couple things. So I mentioned in another some of the other videos, I wanted to put a 37 LaSalle transmission behind the Ardun. I think, number one, that transmission is quite a bit stronger, and that was what was used on Hemis and Cadillacs and Oldsmobiles. A lot of the cars that were putting out some real power back in the day, the 37 LaSalle box was pretty much king shit. So I wanted to put that behind the Ardun because it's really cool. I have a bunch of them laying around. Now with getting this 32 Roadster, I got like way more than I ever need, but I have a couple I've been sitting on for a while now to use on a really special project. So what I've been looking for is an adapter. I mentioned in another video, and by a stroke of luck, I went to Moultrie, and one of the guys from the ham that we were messaging back and forth with, he specialized in LaSalle transmissions and parts and adapters. He had a couple of adapters. Now, he had one that was an old aluminum, like Hildebrandt adapter, but it had been broken and welded, and I was a little shy of it. But the other one that he had, which I think is a lot cooler, was what we ended up picking up, and I wanted to show you guys. So what we have here is some Hot Rodders compilation here of parts that probably has worked out pretty good, and I might steal the idea in the future possibly. So what this is a flathead Ford to CAD LaSalle adapter here. So this is actually the bell housing from a flathead Ford transmission, and I looked at the VIN, and I think it starts with 99A on the bell housing, which I believe is 39 Mercury. So this was a 39 Mercury trans that they basically cut right here where it went flat before the actual transmission case went back. And then what they did is they took the bell housing from a 50 Olds or a CAD LaSalle, and they chopped that off and used just the mounting flange area. They drilled and tapped the Ford bell housing, and attached the LaSalle, CAD LaSalle or Olds portion to that, and that basically made their adapter here. And what it does is it leaves you the fork and a clutch setup that was on it for the flathead Ford. Gives you everything for mounting the CAD LaSalle stuff, and it seems like it worked. Must have been working pretty good because it was on a car, obviously, and being used. And yeah, so you can see it's using the Ford throwout bearing and everything there, which should be just fine. So I'm going to try and, number one, get this mounted up to the engine today, and we're going to try and get this engine pushed back a few inches, 2 or 3 inches. I got to measure it again, but basically we got this room here between the head and the firewall. I want to move it back so the head is like almost touching the firewall, so that we can get the blower and the pulleys and the water outlets back like 2 or 3 inches, and that will give us a ton of room. Well, not a ton of room, more room, so that we can fit things in there like a radiator and some stuff like that. This is the stock flathead intake that's sitting on there. It may not be sitting at the same spot as where the blower is going to sit with the Ardun intake, so that is a little deceiving, but we need to get that engine slid back a little bit, and then I'm going to have to move the mounts back. It's hard to see, but back there for the transmission mount, we're going to need to move that back, but we need the LaSalle trans on to know what's going on. Oh, and I also got my crank back. I use an old school crank grinder here locally that I found, and this is a 4-inch Mercury crank I pulled out of my stash. He went over and ground the crank. It's 10 under. but it's a good fresh clean 4-inch crank. It's been been checked, pretty much ready to go other than changing out the clean out plugs and stuff like that. So I'm going to move that out of the way, get the engine we stripped down. I got all my head studs out without breaking a stud, which was really crazy. So I got to get that out, but this engine's pretty much all stripped down and ready to go and get sent away as well. So I'm going to get all these pieces out of the way and start test fitting the adapter, and we're going to grab this LaSalle trans off the shelf, which is over there, and we'll start mocking some stuff up and getting things a little closer here. So I've been stashing some transmissions up here for a little while now that are kind of my keeper type parts. I'm going to try and sneak myself back here. Parts hoarder problems. And get this 37 LaSalle trans I've been squirreling away for, like I say, a rainy day. All right, so I got my 37 CAD LaSalle box out that I've been stashing. This one is kind of special. It is a old chrome CAD LaSalle. So I bought this from the estate where that blown Hemi came from. About a year or two before the family had an auction, I was able to go in before the auction happened and buy privately. And I had bought this actually from the family at a friend of the family was selling for them at a swap meet, and that's how I started talking to them. And it turns out the guy that owned this transmission actually owned one of the cover cars from Hot Rod magazine in like the mid 50s. It was a red 29 Roadster on, I think 32 rails with like a setback injected Hemi in it. Really kick-ass drag car, super cool. He restored the car, and I actually got to see the car because they still owned it. And everything under the car was chrome, but the transmission. And I think what happened is he pulled the trans out, he built another one, and he had this one just sitting. Well, this transmission, after we oiled everything up and opened it up, actually all the gears were good. It was just dry. It sat dry and got surface rust in there, and basically like the bearings and different stuff, they were just tight. And after we lubed everything up and worked on it, we got it all freed up, and it's actually a really good transmission. Now, why this trans is special, if you don't know anything about the CAD LaSalles, number one, they are very, very strong compared to the Ford transmissions of that time. And they took a lot of abuse. Now, CAD LaSalle transmissions, if you ever find one, as I call it, in the wild, if it's a stock one, the bell housing is going to be another 2-3 feet long, depending on what car exactly it came out of. They came in hearse, they came in ambulances, and they were, I think, an option actually in some of the just standard passenger cars, but the tail shaft is quite long. So back in the day, there was a bunch of Hot Rod magazine articles that showed you how to modify these transmissions to work in different cars. One of the tricks to do was you could take a 50 Olds tail shaft, which is only about this long, and I think I have one stashed over there somewhere, but there's a 50 Olds tail shaft that's maybe only about a foot long that would go on the back of this, and that would make you a nice short transmission that you could then put an open drive line on with putting a more modern rear. Now, you do need to use some of the 50 Olds parts, I believe, to do that swap. I've never actually done the swap myself. I have some of the stuff, just haven't come across everything needed yet to do it. But basically that gave you a shorter tail shaft to run in little cars like Model A's, T's, 32s, all that stuff. So the other way that's actually probably one of the most desirable to find is they did an article on how to modify and put a torque tube Ford rear tail shaft section on it, or a transmission mount and U-joint on these. So it's a pretty involved process. You basically have to take the main shaft here, and you have to actually cut it, and I believe spline it, and then drill and tap it so that it will actually fit the U-joint for a torque tube driveline setup. The other thing you have to do is actually drill and tap into the transmission to put the forward trans mount on here, and there's different trans mounts. Obviously, I have one that has like the 32 mount that's like a sandwich style. This is a later style that we have on here, and this will actually work really well with what we're doing in the 33. So not only is this chrome, it's cool because it's old chrome, and we all love that junk if you're into these old hot rods, but also it has the right transmission mount on it, and it keeps it nice and short and small so that we can fit it in basically in the same locations. So that's where we're at with, you know, why we need to do all this different stuff. So I'm going to grab this and mount this up to the bell housing and see if we can get it all mocked up onto the engine. Alright, so we got our adapter and my trans mounted up like you guys saw. Struggling a little bit because I'm by myself. But what we found is I had a little worry when we were buying this adapter. The Hildebrand adapter actually seemed to be just a hair taller overall, and I was a little worried if that was a problem with this. So as I was bolting this down, this is about as far as I got. If we go any further than this, we actually jam the input shaft into the crankshaft, and that causes the trans to bind so that you can't turn it over. So basically this adapter is just a little too short. So one of two things what they did, they might have taken the input shaft on this trans and just lopped it off and took that, I think it's a little over a 1/4 inch, maybe it's like 5/16 or something like that, that they probably took off of the input shaft, just the little snout where it goes through the into the pilot bushing and stuff in the clutch or in the crank, and that's what's causing the problem there. So I'm not sure, either they did that or they actually just had a spacer that they had made in here that spaced it back a little bit. The only thing I'm worried is I don't know how long that section that goes through the pilot bushing and into the crank, how long that is, and if we cut it off, we may not have enough room to actually go through the clutch and go in, and it could cause other problems. So what I think I'm going to do is try and actually space it out. So we're going to have to probably get a little spacer made up for this. What I need to do just for now, just to keep moving forward, I'm just going to get some washers to shove in there and tighten down just to get it tight, because all we're trying to do is just get our motor mount location and trans mount location set up. So I'm going to kind of slide this thing in and let it just kind of set on the jack stands and the jack and my big hoist tonight, and then I'll go get some supplies tomorrow. The other thing I need to do is I really need to take this torque tube out and take it off because it's kind of in the way and I don't know how it's going to drive. So I may pull that off as well once we slide this back and kind of see where it's going to be, because we may need to adjust that torque tube depending on what we do. So at least we're moving forward here, get some supplies, and then we can slide this thing in and work on getting the new trans mounts located. Definitely gotta pull that torque tube out. Dang it. Alright, so after getting the engine and trans bolted in place, ended up just shaving a little bit off of the pilot bearing snout area on the trans, and everything went together pretty nice. I do have to do some modifications for a custom pilot bushing, but that should be okay. But you can see here the problem we're having is I am running into where the outlet for the drain on the trans is right there. That's running into that. So I'm going to have to do some clearancing on the stock mount to get everything slid back further, which I expected. So I'm going to pull this back out again for like the 5th time and start just trimming away a little bit to get this thing to slide back how I want. Holy crap. Alright, so I got the bracket off, or the mount rough cut out of the frame. I just did what I could with the plasma cutter to get it in there. There wasn't a real good way. We're going to clean all this up. I just cut it smaller than I needed the hole to be, but I was having some trouble with a little bit of fire, and we got all this caked up dirt and grease that's actually inside of this boxed area. And there's literally like an inch of this stuff in here. that we need to get out. We can get this all cleaned up in here with the sander, and then try to test fitting our engine back in. Cut this one more little bracket off back there, but we'll sand all this in, and then eventually this will get boxed in like it never happened, and it should work out all right. But I needed to get it rough cut quickly. Now I can get in here with the grinder and just grind everything back out, get it looking a little more symmetrical and not so jagged and ugly. All right, let's see if we can get this on here. A lot closer. Now, just fit this rocker cover. So a lot better. Could probably go back not a lot. All right. All right, so that was another one of those jobs that took like a whole entire day and probably part of an evening to get done. I had a lot of things that I was fighting with. Number one, like you guys saw early on, the adapter that was custom made the way it was made, you basically had to trim just a tiny bit off of the snout where it actually goes into the pilot bushing, because a Ford is, I think the little snout there is about an inch, or I'm sorry, is about 3/4 of an inch long, and the LaSalle is, I think, a little over 3/4 of an inch from memory. So we had to take a little bit off of that to make it work. I think with the way the LaSalle was, there probably was a little more room to play there. Now, the other thing that I ended up running into is that the LaSalle, actually where it hits the pilot bushing or bearing, it is tapered, whereas the Ford is actually just like straight cut. It's just a square cut there where it steps up to go into the splines. I didn't actually think of that when I was putting everything together, so it actually went together just fine with without a clutch, but then I decided to throw a clutch in just to test everything and see how it went. And I slid it in and started turning it down. It was binding again. So we pulled it back apart and saw that it was hitting on that taper, and then it dawned on me that the Ford one was square, and where I measured to was to the bottom of the taper, not to the top. So what happens there is we actually need to make a tapered pilot bushing that will allow it to kind of fit around the LaSalle. So I'll need to do that later. I took the clutch out. At least I know that, and we're not like doing final assembly. And I'm like, what the heck's going on? So now that we have that all together, I just bolted it together without a clutch for now. I'll work on that with some spare transmissions and engines in the background. But right now, you can see the engine is back in, and I have a lot closer. Before, the engine, I could fit like my whole like arm in between it where it was sitting before. Now we have it real tight. I like that gap there. It's close, but it's not so close that it's like touching the heads and going to be rubbing against the firewall. Very close back there, but I don't think that'll be an issue. The biggest thing you can see here is the crank. Before, the end of the crank here was like way out, like somewhere in here. I think it was almost like either touching here or sitting over top of there, which was not good. So we got that pushed back pretty good, which is great. Still not like super far back, but it's all right. The kind of funny thing is all the modifications we had to do on the back end, it moved a little bit here, but with this slotted hole, it actually is deceiving. It doesn't look like we moved very much, but we did. The center of the hole is somewhere like, I think about there for the stock mount. So it moved back quite a bit. So what I'll be able to do is just kind of sculpt a mount around in that webbing there when we're kind of doing the final welding. I can kind of drill a hole once we get the engine and trans centered, drill a hole for where it needs to be, and then I'll kind of sculpt out around it to make it look kind of original, and that should work out pretty good. Then on the inside here is where a lot of the work's going to need to happen. The LaSalle trans is actually a little bit longer than the Ford trans, even with the short Ford tail shaft set up on here like it has. The original LaSalle trans, the tail shaft would go like to here. So it's a lot shorter with the cut off and modified like this one had done. But I had to cut out down in the bottom in that center hoop there to get it to fit in. Now what we need to do is I need to build some tabs on either side that will allow us to mount the transmission. So, and then I'll have to just plate everything in. We'll put some plate and weld everything in, make it kind of look original when it's done, or at least it'll look acceptable and not just have giant holes cut in it. But for now, I just need to cut the holes, sculpt everything in, and you know, just clearance everything till we have a good fit and the engine and trans are centered again. Then I can work on, once the engine and trans are back out, plating all that up and making it nice and strong and pretty. But yeah, so a lot of work for what seems like nothing really changed, but I swear we did a ton of work, and it was just one of these things. Some of this stuff takes a lot of time to do, but you can see over here we got plenty of room, so should work out just fine. So that is basically it for this update on the 33 3-window project. Really excited. Like I mentioned before, I got the crank and I got a bunch of parts back. So we're getting close to the point where I can actually gather all my parts up, take them north to Ron and get them dropped off so that he can kind of do his magic, and I can keep working on this car in the background. This project is sort of a side project, if you want to call it that, since there's a lot of stuff that I'm sort of gathering and waiting on, but this is the stuff I wanted to get done so I could keep moving forward in the grand scheme of things. So quick little update. I'll do another one when I do the trans mounts and get everything modified for actual mounts to show you guys how I tackled that. But for now, I thought this would be good just to update you guys on the 33 project. So thank you guys for watching. Really appreciate it. Catch you later.